Well, it is that time. All of the projections, throw them out the windows because we now have our actual field of 64 for the NCAA Baseball tournament. Been talking about this past couple weeks. Had a lot of fun putting together my projections on a week-to-week basis. But we now have our field. I want to hop on here and pretty much give a reaction and maybe do a little bit of predicting for the actual regional rounds. Before I get into it, I'll talk about my thoughts on the hosting and the order in which they were hosting. Last night, at the conclusion of all the conference tournaments championships, the committee did release their 16 regional hosts. And before they released that, probably like an hour before, I went ahead and put up my prediction for who those 16, or it wasn't really my prediction. It was more of who I would be putting in, kind of based on. It was kind of a mix of my opinion and what I think the committee's going to do. I put a tweet out with my prediction, and like for instance, I had a comment say something about Jacksonville State should be hosting, and if you've watched one of my first two Field of 64 projections, I had Jacksonville State in as a host. More so of a fact that that was more so me kind of rewarding Jacksonville State for the resume they had put together and the fact that I believed they would be, CUSA regular season champs and CUSA tournament champs, which they were. And then when it came down to it, when I kind of put out this prediction yesterday, I didn't have Jacksonville State in because it was like, in my personal opinion, I would have had them hosting because they won one of the best mid-major conferences in the nation, won the tournament, and had 40-plus wins on the season. But at the same time, it's not super realistic because their RPI was 25 RPI, and the lowest RPI that they have hosting is Kansas at 19. Kansas had to win their regular season and their tournament to get that bid. So that's kind of like a little bit of a thought process for how I had my regional host. The way I had ranked them, the way I predicted them, or the way I would have had them was UCLA 1, Georgia Tech 2, Georgia 3. And then 4 through 6 is kind of where there was a lot of shuffling between myself and the committee. So I had North Carolina 4, Texas 5, Auburn 6, Alabama 7, Southern Miss 8. So of those 8 top 8 seeds, Southern Miss is the only one that the committee didn't put in as a top 8. It was Florida in that final spot, which I kind of saw coming. I know last year they didn't reward Coastal with a top 8 seed, despite the fact that their season was probably more dominant than Southern Miss's was this year. And Coastal still didn't get that last year out of the same conference. But as far as the order here, they had Auburn 4, North Carolina 5, Texas 6. I have North Carolina 4, Texas 5, Auburn 6. For me, I had North Carolina 4. They only dropped one series all year. It was a series against Virginia, who's a tournament team. They did get to the ACC final game against Georgia Tech. And then between Texas and Auburn, I had Texas ranked above Auburn for the fact that Texas did have that series win at Auburn earlier in the season. And then Auburn, they did have the toughest schedule in the country. Just looking back at it now, yeah, they had the number 1 strength of schedule in the country. We're ranked third in the RPI. Texas was 6. But you kind of have to dig a little deeper here on some of these teams and really compare, some of the, especially like in conference who they played. Like Texas had 2 series losses all year. One was Texas A&M, and then the other was on the road at Tennessee. And then Auburn had the home series loss to Texas. They got swept by Alabama earlier in the season, and then they dropped a series to Georgia at home to round out the regular season schedule. So it was kind of a matter of fact that Auburn did have those 3 series losses in conference compared to Texas's 2, and the 2 series losses for Texas weren't necessarily bad losses at all either. Texas, at the time they played, both their series losses came on the road. Texas went to A&M and got beat. At the time, Texas A&M was like the hottest team in the country, and then they go on the road to Tennessee, which is not an easy place to play, regardless of the fact that Tennessee didn't play their best baseball this year. They still came out as a 2 seed. And then, Auburn, they dropped 2 series at home, Georgia and Texas, and then also get swept by Alabama. And Texas has that head-to-head over Auburn. So that's why I would have ranked Texas over Auburn. But Auburn did hold up very well with the toughest schedule in the nation. So it's not necessarily, at this point, I'm just kind of nitpicking almost in a sense. At the end of the day, it's like, as long as they get the right 8 teams in as top 8 seeds, I'm not really going to complain about it. Southern Miss that's another one I'm not necessarily going to complain about because Florida also played a very tough schedule, and they have some marquee wins in there. They were the only team to beat Georgia in the series, and they did it on the road in Athens. So, I mean, Florida did put up to a very, when it was all said and done, I mean, all year I kind of talked about how Florida was a roller coaster ride because, they lose a series at home to High Point. They get swept by Alabama. They lose a series at home to Ole Miss. They lose a series at home to Texas A&M. They lose a series at home to Auburn. So it's like there's a lot of series losses on there that, if a few of those flip, you're talking about maybe a top 4 team. And then they also had the 3 midweek wins over Florida State. And so when it was all said and done, Florida did end up having a pretty solid resume. And I'll get into the RPI thing in a little bit, but Florida did have the better RPI than Southern Miss, and it was the second hardest strength schedule in the country. So I'm not mad at them putting Florida in at 8. I just personally would have had Southern Miss, and then obviously they had Southern Miss at 9. But then my next 8, in my personal prediction, I had Florida 9, Kansas 10, Nebraska 11, Florida State 12. Oregon 13, Arkansas 14, and then Texas A&M 15, which I had a lot of A&M fans kind of angry about that in my comments, but it is what it is. That's kind of how I saw it. And then West Virginia at 16. So of those 8 teams, obviously Arkansas didn't get a host, and then they were replaced by Mississippi State. This was honestly kind of my biggest gripe with what the committee did, was leaving Arkansas out as a host. In all of my official Field of 64s, I never had Arkansas hosting, but they did Arkansas finished very strong, right? They were 21st in the RPI. Like I said, the highest or the lowest RPI that they have hosting is Kansas at 19, and then they have Mississippi State in. They were 13th in the RPI. So last night when they released the regional hosts, the fact that they put Mississippi State in over Arkansas was like. That was kind of showing us that, okay, that RPI is going to play big in this. Because, in my opinion, Arkansas had a better resume than Mississippi State. And they were separated by 8 RPI points. Mississippi State barely had them beaten in strength of schedule. Barely had them beat in non-conference strength schedule. Where I can see the argument against Arkansas is the non-conference RPI. Arkansas was 59 non-conference RPI because they did drop a few bad games early on in the season. But then Arkansas did have 18 Q1 wins compared to Mississippi State's 9. So Arkansas has double the amount of Q1 wins. And then Mississippi State was also sub 500 in Q1, Q2, which as a host, they're the only hosting team that was sub 500 in Q1, Q2. So basically what that means is they were sub 500 against there's a little more nuance to it, but essentially they were sub 500 against the top half of the NCAA, is how I see it at least. And then Arkansas also had a head-to-head over Mississippi State. So, if the resumes were close enough, which I honestly don't think they were. I don't think they were close enough to where it was like, okay, let's just look at the RPI. I think Arkansas had a lot of better wins in there than Mississippi State. They had the head-to-head over Mississippi State in the first week of SEC play. Then they beat South Carolina. Then they get swept by Florida, lose to Auburn, but then they go and sweep Alabama, drop 2 or 3 from Georgia, beat Missouri 2 out of 3. Then they get a series win over Ole Miss, series win over Oklahoma, and then they finish the season with a series win over Kentucky. And then what stuck out for me was the fact that they make the SEC championship And I think they only got one bye there. They beat Tennessee, they beat Texas, they beat Auburn to get to that final against Georgia. The way they finished the season for me was enough for me to put them over Mississippi State. And then you take a look at Mississippi State's resume. They lose that series to Arkansas, get swept by Georgia, get swept by Tennessee, lose a series at Texas, lose a series to Auburn, lose a series to Texas A&M. So, how many series wins do you have in the SEC? You drop your final 3 SEC series. You beat LSU, you beat South Carolina, you beat Ole Miss and Vandy. So that's 4 SEC series wins. Arkansas gets 6 series wins in the SEC. So it wasn't that close for me to where it's like, okay, let's just fall back on the RPI, which is something I did do plenty of times when kind of projecting this. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was like, for me at least, when doing my projections, it was always kind of difficult finding 16 deserving teams. So at the end of the day, I mean, if you go back to, in recent seasons, I don't think maybe in Arkansas and Mississippi State, maybe even a few more teams on here don't get a regional host. So at the end of the day, it is what it is. I'm not complaining too much about it. Obviously, the committee has a difficult job. And one thing I've learned about college sports is that nobody's happy at any time. It's like, it doesn't matter if the committee puts together the perfect field, perfect playoff. People are going to be angry about how they did it. So, and no one's ever happy. I never see anyone that's like, yeah, the committee got it right. I never see that. There was questionable things they did. Like for me, leaving Arkansas out, putting Mississippi State was questionable, and then leaving Mercer out of the field, very questionable. So how they ordered their 9 through 16: Southern Miss, Florida State 10, Oregon 11, Texas A&M 12, Nebraska 13, Mississippi State 14, Kansas 15, and then West Virginia 16. Which, that's another thing. After they released the regional hosts and Mississippi State was in, I immediately was like, okay, that's a 16 seed. They put them at 14. Once again, kind of is what it is. But let's go ahead and let's talk real quick about who they left out of the field. So I put together a field of 64 last night after they released the regional hosts. And there was only one discrepancy between my projection and the committee's, and what the committee decided on, and that was that I had Texas State out and Mercer in. Committee put Texas State in and left Mercer out. So my last 4 in were Troy, Mercer, Kentucky, NC State. Troy, Kentucky, and NC State get in. Mercer does not get in. And then my first 4 out was Michigan, TCU, Texas State, and UTSA. I know there is a contingent of people that is, on the case of UTSA that they should have been in. For me, there wasn't quite enough there for me to feel confident about putting them in, so they were one of my first 4 out. But Mercer, when you size them up against Texas State, so Mercer was the highest RPI left out of the tournament. They were 28th in the RPI. Okay, 15-6 in the SoCon. They lose the SoCon to the Citadel, which that was kind of the backbreaker there. If they win that, obviously, if they win the tournament, they're in. But the fact that they lost that tournament to the Citadel, who was, I want to say they were closer to 100 in the RPI. That's kind of what opened up the door for them to be left out, right? What the committee said about Mercer was it came down to their strength of schedule. Okay, they were 118 in strength schedule, which okay, and then there were 218 in non-conference strength schedule. But they did get a win over Georgia Tech. That was their only Quad 1 win. They were 1-4 in Quad 1, but they were 9-9 in Quad 2. So they had more Quad 2 wins than plenty of teams above them. Like they played more Quad 1, Quad 2 games than Oregon State, right? And Oregon State only won one more Quad 1 game than Mercer, and they both played 5 Quad 1 games. So I don't know. I think this was because it's like, I didn't get it at all, because they did show us with them taking Mississippi State over Arkansas that RPI was going to be a decider here. And then I would imagine in their minds that it came down to Mercer and Texas State. Kentucky and NC State, I think, obviously they were on the bubble and were a last four in type of situation. But I didn't really have any doubts that they were going to be left out by the committee because, Kentucky did get to the magic number 13 in the SEC. And then, like, NC State, they were 51 in the RPI, but they got their 14 wins in the ACC. So I was confident saying the committee was going to put them in. So in my opinion, and then also you had Troy, who 35th in the RPI. They were above Texas State. And, like, when I was putting my projection together and I was kind of trying to find the last couple of teams, it's like, Troy kind of stuck out there. 12 wins in quad 1, quad 2, 8th in strength of schedule. So the resume was good enough for me there when, I was kind of grasping for teams at that point. And then for me, like, it came down to Mercer and Texas State. And I was comfortable putting Mercer in because of the 28 RPI. I kind of put my committee cap on, RPI is gospel. And RPI is not gospel, but, when that's kind of what we talk about with the committee is like they're too committed to the RPI. And that's how I had Mercer in. And so they were separated by 15 RPI points from Texas State, who was 43rd in the RPI. They did have they were ranked 32nd in strength of schedule, 20th in non-conference strength of schedule, 16 and 14 in the Sun Belt, which in most seasons that's not going to cut it, right? And so Mercer, they played who was in front of them. Yes, the non-conference wasn't great, but they come away with 44 wins and 20th in their RPI. So I know they came on and said it was the strength schedule. I don't understand it with how they did dominate their schedule. If you take a deeper look into who they played, like they won a series against Troy to open the season. Troy got in as an at-large. They won their season series against the Citadel, who got in as the conference champion auto bid. They did get that midweek win at Georgia Tech, which was really impressive. So, I mean, I get it, the strength of schedule. You want to reward teams that played a tough schedule. But, I mean, that's the other thing, too. It's like we always have the conversation about how midweeks don't matter. And then, like, when it comes down to it with the tournament, is midweeks, honestly, for these mid-major teams, midweeks matter more than anything. Because, obviously, you have to play your conference schedule. And then it's up to you to schedule your midweeks, right? But then we are always talking about how midweeks don't matter. I think midweeks don't matter. They probably only don't matter when the committee is sizing up resumes for the tournament. I really think it only doesn't matter for Power 4 or maybe even SEC, ACC. So I hope that at least incentivizes teams to, schedule tough teams in the midweek. So that was probably my biggest gripe, was leaving Mercer out, probably more than leaving Arkansas out of a hosting bid. But when it comes down to it, I think they did a decent job. The other weird thing for me was the way that they seeded the 2 seeds. Like, you have Virginia Tech as a 2. Like, I know that they were supposed to be ranking all the teams like 1 through 32, and then kind of trying their best to group them regionally. Like, I know if you watch D1 Baseball's Nerdcast, like, they rank them out 1 through 32, and then they separate 16 through 32 into like 4 team, like, to quads of 4 teams, and then they size them up against the top 16, and then try to group them regionally. Because, like, for instance, like, if you like Mississippi State, when they put them in as a regional host, in my mind, I was like, okay, they're ranked 16th, and then Arkansas would have been the next team for me at 17. But obviously, you can't put Arkansas and Mississippi State in the same regional because you can't have conference repeats in regionals. So you kind of have to offset just a little bit. But then, so they had Virginia Tech as a 2 seed in the UCLA regional, so that's like the lowest ranked 2 seed. But Virginia Tech was 42nd in the RPI. So the kind of how they ranked the 2 seeds didn't make a ton of sense. It's like Virginia Tech, I don't think was a 2 seed at all, and then also they have them going across the country to UCLA. So I was like, what is the thought process there? And then actually, I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen to actually show you the. I'm sorry, I'm kind of all over the place in this video. I don't really have a script for it. I'm just kind of talking about my thoughts on the field. So yeah, so like with this with the UCLA regional, you have Virginia Tech as a 2 seed, and then you jump down to the Atlanta regional. You have Oklahoma as the 2 seed, which for me, Oklahoma was more like a mid-tier 3 seed. At least they were 24th in the RPI, but according to ranking them 1 through 32, let's just assume they were ranked by RPI. That would be the 31st ranked team. So it didn't seem like there was obviously there was some kind of thought process. I just can't pick it out when looking at these. Like Boston College here at the Athens regional, they weren't a 2 seed for me either. They were more of a mid-tier 3 seed. And then like UC Santa Barbara is a 2 seed here, going to the Austin regional against Texas. UC Santa Barbara was 38th in the RPI. So another team kind of ranked out of that top 30 that they gave a 2 seed to. And then there also didn't seem to be too much like effort into ranking like the 4 seeds. Like South Dakota State was the lowest ranked auto bid according to RPI. They were like 238 or something like that, which for me, so when I projected, I put them with UCLA because it's like you should reward the number 1 seed by giving them the worst team in the field. But South Dakota State gets in here to the Lincoln Regional, and Nebraska's a 13 seed. So kind of the way that they ranked these 4 seeds didn't make a ton of sense either. Not that it's going to matter too much when it's all said and done. And like Alabama State, I think was maybe the next lowest ranked auto bid outside of South Dakota State, and they get paired up with Alabama as a 7 seed. But at the end of the day, I think they did a decent job. They got 61 of the 62 teams I wanted in the tournament. Left Mercer out. You're not going to get what you want, especially when it comes to a committee in college sports. Like I said, you got to take what you can get because it's a tough job. But I do want to run through these regionals real quick, talk about some matchups I like. We'll start from the front. Los Angeles Regional, UCLA gets Virginia Tech. Already talked about that. Don't really understand that. And then Cal Poly, they were a stolen bid. They stole the bid over UC Santa Barbara out of the Big West. Which, I mean, let's say Cal Poly doesn't win their conference tournament. They're not in as an at-large, and so that opens the door for Mercer back into the tournament. So, I mean, there were a handful of stolen bids in the conference tournaments. That was also another thing to consider when trying to get every team you wanted in. And then St. Mary's as the 4 seed. Georgia Tech gets Oklahoma as a 2 seed. The Citadel, who was the stolen bid over Mercer out of the SoCon. And then UIC, Illinois Chicago, as the 4 seed. That I don't want to say any regional is going to be a cakewalk because obviously anything can happen in college baseball, in baseball in general. But I would say that's a pretty not a very tough task for Georgia Tech. Oklahoma, that's a pretty underwhelming 2 seed. And then the Citadel, who was not really on the radar of anybody. Well, I mean, they're a good program, but they were never considered for an at-large. And I think in their regular season standings, they may have finished 3rd or 4th in the SoCon. And then so Georgia, Athens Regional, number 3rd overall seed. You get Boston College as a 2 seed. I thought they were a 3 seed, and then Liberty as their 3 seed, and then Long Island. That could end up being that's a sneaky regional there. Because Boston College can get hot at the right time, and then Liberty has been, one of the best teams in the CUSA, and then Long Island steals the Northeast Conference from Fairleigh Dickinson there at the end. Auburn Regional, 4th overall seed, you get UCF as your 2 seed, NC State, and then Milwaukee stole the Horizon from Wright State. Wright State was the pick out of that conference all year without question, and then they take down Wright State in pretty dramatic fashion. I believe it was a walk-off home run to end that conference championship. Milwaukee gets in. I can't remember if they said it's their first time ever in the tournament or the first time in a while. But fun story there. Another regional that's probably not going to be too tough of a draw for the number one seed there in Auburn. Chapel Hill Regional, North Carolina. This is probably. I mean, I'll kind of look back at it when I've gone through all these, but this is definitely a candidate for the toughest regional, which is like another instance in where I'm like, I don't understand how the thought process behind the committee and ranking these teams, because in my opinion it's like the top 8 seeds should get the easy regionals, but this is a very tough regional here. You got Tennessee, who has played underwhelming baseball this year compared to their last couple of seasons, but they're still a battle-tested team that is 2 years removed from a national title, 1 year removed from a super regional appearance, and then you got East Carolina, who won the American. And regardless of what their season has looked like, that's another team that is they're no strangers to this type of task in front of them, right? And then VCU, so it's definitely a very sneaky regional there. I would still say that North Carolina is the favorite out of there, but I would not be surprised if Tennessee or East Carolina come out of that one. Austin Regional, six overall seed Texas. You get UC Santa Barbara in this one as the 2 seed, and then Tarleton State, who won the Western Athletic, and then Holy Cross, who stole the Patriot League from Bucknell. This is another one like with a matchup I'm looking forward to. You potentially get Jackson, Florida versus Texas at some point in this regional. Early on I would say like halfway through the season, when it really started to look like UC Santa Barbara was going to be an at-large, I was already thinking about like, okay, who can I pair UC Santa Barbara with in the field of 64 to where we're getting Jackson, Florida versus like a high-powered offense. I don't know how UC Santa Barbara is going to stack up their weekend rotation. They're obviously one of the better pitching groups in the nation, so they could save Jackson, Florida for game 2 of that regional if they feel good about their chances against Tarleton State in the opening round, and then they get Texas in that second game. So I think that there's a good chance we see Jackson, Florida versus Texas at some point. One of the best offenses in the nation versus the top pitcher in the nation, and projected first pitcher off the board in the MLB draft. It's going to be a lot of fun. I still think Texas is a clear favorite there because I do think that their pitching staff sizes up with UC Santa Barbara just fine. And then obviously Texas is one of the best offenses in the nation as well. Alabama, 7th overall seed, Tuscaloosa Regional. This is probably, I would say Alabama for me is the most likely team from the top 8 to lose a regional. Not a knock against Alabama. They have kind of been like a case of, being hot and cold this year, despite the fact that they came out with where was their RPI on the season? They came out with 6 overall RPI. They had some bad series losses, but some really good series wins, kind of like Florida, like we talked about earlier. The reason I say Alabama would be the most likely 8 seed, because I think that they did, in my opinion, they drew the best number 2 seed, which is Oklahoma State. That's one of the best offenses in the country, led by Colin Ritchie. You do get South Carolina Upstate and Alabama State as a 3 and 4 seeds, which I don't really expect them to make much noise. But I think that's the most evenly matched 1 and 2 seeds with Alabama and Oklahoma State. And then also with the Gainesville Regional, Florida draws Miami as their 2 seed. They obviously played earlier in the season. Florida took 2 of 3 from Miami on the road in Miami. Actually, it wasn't even 2 of 3. I think their final game got rained out, and so Florida just took 2 from Miami in Miami. And then you get Troy as a at-large there as the 3 seed, sneaky team there, and then Ryder out of the MAC. Huge in-state rivals there between Florida and Miami. So kudos to the committee for that one. And then you've got, so on the other side of the bracket, Southern Miss as the 9th overall seed. This is another regional that, honestly, the top 3 teams, honestly, I could see a reality in which any of these teams win this regional. Southern Miss, been there, done that. They're battle tested. They've been in the postseason. They're hosting at one of the toughest places to play in college baseball. But then you get Virginia, who's been, I mean, the second half of their season was underwhelming, but they were also the only team to beat North Carolina in the series all year. They did it on the road in Chapel Hill earlier in the season. And then Jacksonville State, already kind of mentioned them earlier. They were a team I played with all season as a team that I could see hosting. They get in as a 3 seed. And then Little Rock wins the Ohio Valley. Yeah, so Little Rock wins the Ohio Valley after not really being on my radar as the auto bid all year. But they took, I mean, LSU won the national championship last year, and they took LSU to the final game of their regional last year. So another team that's been there. This might be my favorite regional right here. Unfortunately that Southern Miss does draw such a tough regional because I would love to see them finally make it to Omaha. Florida State at 10. I would have had them ranked a little bit lower than 10 just because they were sub 500 in Quad 1. But they get Coastal Carolina as a 2 seed, and then Northern Illinois and St. John's. St. John's wins the Big East. Northern Illinois wins the Mid-American. And then you got the Eugene Regional. This is another one where I'm like, kudos to the committee, getting Oregon and Oregon State in the same regional. Like I said, with Alabama and Oklahoma State as the two closest, as the most balanced matchup within the top 8 regionals, Oregon State on this other half, definitely the best matchup there. Because Oregon State, I mean, when it was also, I mean, I didn't do a top 25 following the conference tournaments, but leading into the conference tournaments, I had Oregon State ranked over Oregon on my top 25s. I think they finished 7th or 8th on my final top 25, and then Oregon was like 9 or 10. They did split their season series in their midweeks. Oregon State just doesn't get the hosting bid just because it was an underwhelming schedule. But it was kind of a no-brainer getting them in the same regional because Oregon was going to be a lower 1 seed. Oregon State was going to be a higher 2 seed. So that will be a lot of fun. And then Washington State gets the Mountain West, and then Yale gets the Ivy League. So Yale, tough trip across the country. Got to play Oregon game 1. And Oregon's been one of the hotter teams in the nation as of late. They nearly take down UCLA in that Big Ten title game. College Station Regional, Texas A&M is the 12th overall seed. They get USC as their 2 seed. USC I would have had them closer to. I would have had them as I would have had Arkansas as my top 2 seed, and then I probably would have had USC following because USC, they were ranked 9th in the RPI. The reason they don't get a hosting bid is the fact they only had 1 Quad 1 win. So I probably would have paired them with either Nebraska or West Virginia. I mean, it would have been a long trek across the country, but I would have had them higher up in that range. So Texas A&M does pull a tough regional here. They do get Texas State, who, in my opinion, shouldn't have been in, but still another solid Sun Belt team. And then Lamar, who got the Southland title. So that's another sneaky regional matchup. Sneaky group of teams there that could knock off Texas A&M. And Texas A&M hasn't been playing very inspired ball as of late either. Nebraska as the 13th overall seed. So I've already kind of coined some of these other regionals as the toughest ones, but this is no doubt the toughest one. It's unfortunate Nebraska gets their first regional. Is it their first regional ever or first in a while? I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a tough task for their first one in however many years it is. They get Ole Miss as a 2 seed, which was after Arkansas and USC, probably Ole Miss there as my next 2 seed. And then Arizona State, who I think is one of the better 3 seeds in the country. The RPI didn't come out very well. Yeah, they finished 44 in the RPI, but they were 19 and 11 in the Big 12. So I think their RPI was more so a matter of the non-conference strength of schedule. But they did play very good in the Big 12 this year. And then South Dakota State as the 4 seed, who was the lowest ranked auto bid. So, I mean, Nebraska, Ole Miss, Arizona State, that's honestly, between those 3 teams is a toss-up for me. You probably give the nod to Nebraska just because they're hosting. Did have the best season out of these 3, but I mean, Ole Miss coming out of the SEC, Arizona the Big 12. You got three Power Four conferences represent. I think it might be the only regional where you have three Power Fours. Yeah, you don't have it in LA, you don't have it in Atlanta, don't have it in Athens. Okay, you do have three Power Fours represented in Auburn. You got in the Auburn regional, you got Auburn, UCF, and NC State. You do have three in the West Virginia regional, West Virginia, Wake Forest, Kentucky. Yeah, and that's it. So you only have three regionals with more than two Power Fours, and this Lincoln Regional is one of them, and it's probably the best three Power Fours of those three regionals. So another one where it's like, I would take I'm not going to say I would take a specific team over Nebraska, but I would take the field over Nebraska in this regional, and it's probably the only regional that I would feel confident saying that. Still would love to see Nebraska come out of that, because I think it would be electric to see Nebraska in Omaha, but just a very tough draw for them there. And then Mississippi State gets the 14th overall seed. I already mentioned them, how I didn't think they should be hosting. If they should have been 16 seed. But regardless, they get in here as 14. They get Cincinnati as their 2 seed. And then Louisiana, who very solid run to finish out the season. They fall to Southern Miss in the Sun Belt Championship. But another sneaky team in that regional. And Cincinnati kind of just flew under the radar all year as one of the best teams in the Big 12. Kansas gets Arkansas and Missouri State as their 2 and 3 seeds. And then Northeastern, one of the biggest surprises of the conference tournaments was that Northeastern takes down Campbell. Campbell was a very easy auto bid all year for me. They really dominated the Coastal Athletic. Campbell was 60th in RPI. And then Northeastern, you have to go down a little bit to find them. 88th in the RPI. They do finish 22 and 8 in the Coastal Athletics, so they were second in the regular season, but they get Campbell in the conference championship there. So a hot team right now. And then obviously you get Arkansas, who I thought was going to be a regional host, or in my opinion should have been a regional host. And then Missouri State, who highest ranked RPI in the Conference USA over Jacksonville State, but they don't win the regular season or the conference championship. But an excellent program nonetheless. So that's another tough regional. I would probably, honestly, I might take Arkansas over Kansas in this one, just because Arkansas is hot and Kansas, this is their first time in this position. That roster is built with a lot of like D3 and JUCO transfers, and nothing against that, but I just don't know if they're battle tested enough to take down an Arkansas in this regional. But another team like Nebraska would love to see Kansas kind of go on a run. And then the final regional, Morgantown, you got West Virginia hosting that one as the 16th overall seed. You get Wake Forest, and then Kentucky and Binghamton out of the American East. Kentucky was a team for me that if I was the committee, I would have left them out. Okay? I put them in my projection as a last four in, just because they did get to the magic number of 13 in the SEC, and I knew that they would probably be rewarded for that. And they were 37th in the RPI. But when you look at it, there wasn't anything on the resume that really stuck out. So you sweep UNC Greensboro to open the season. You take 2 or 3 from Evansville. You sweep St. John's, who's in the tournament. You win 2 midweeks over Eastern Kentucky. Sweep Citadel, who's in the tournament. And then you sweep Alabama to open SEC play, which that was, at that point, everyone was out on Alabama. Everyone was in on Kentucky. And then it just kind of falls apart there for Kentucky. You drop 2 or 3 on the road to Ole Miss. Drop 2 or 3 on the road to LSU, who was surprisingly one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. Drop 2 or 3 at home to Missouri. Drop 2 or 3 on the road to Auburn. Drop 2 or 3 at home to Vanderbilt. Drop 2 or 3 on the road to South Carolina. Then you get 2 or 3 at home against Tennessee. Drop 2 or 3 on the road to Florida. dropped 2 or 3 at home to Arkansas. That opening weekend against Alabama that they swept, that's holding a ton of weight just because Alabama is a top 8 seed. If they drop one of those games in the Alabama series, they're out because then they're at 12. They're at 12 wins in the SEC, and they don't have those. That statement series. I mean, it still would have been a statement series if they took 2 or 3 from Bama, but the fact that it's a sweep is carrying a ton of weight in there. So I personally would have left Kentucky out and wouldn't have felt bad about it, but they get in regardless. And then Wake Forest has, their RPI has been good all year. Another team that there wasn't necessarily a whole lot on their resume that stuck out to me, but they are here as the 2 seed in the 16th ranked regional, so that kind of tells you how committee viewed Wake Forest. So another one where you get 3 Power 4s in there. So West Virginia, to me, is one of the top teams, one of the hottest teams in the nation right now. They are coming off of a series sweep of Kansas a couple weeks ago. But another one where I might take the field over West Virginia just because you do have multiple Power 4s in there. And a very good Binghamton team that could, kind of beat up on West Virginia in that opening game. Maybe not beat them, but, really test them. And then they go in with a weaker bullpen into that second game. So there's your 16 regionals. And then real quick, if you go on my website, if you go on my website on mobile, it might look a little different. But if you're looking on desktop here, and obviously I have it pulled up here, the regionals across from each other are the ones that are paired with each other. So you have 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, 3 versus 14. So you have the potential of UCLA versus West Virginia in the Super Regional, Georgia Tech versus Kansas, Georgia versus Mississippi State, which that's another reason I probably wouldn't have put Mississippi State as a 14th overall seed. It's because they did play each other already in the regular season, and then they also played each other in the conference tournament. So they've already played 4 games against each other, and then you're talking about them potentially playing 3 games against each other in a Super Regional. So that's another reason I had Mississippi State lower. Auburn versus Nebraska, North Carolina versus Texas A&M, Texas versus Oregon, Alabama versus Florida State, and then Florida versus Southern Miss. That's how it would shake out if every host won their regional, which isn't going to happen. I would have to look back on recent history to see if there's ever been a time in which every host won their regional. I definitely would not bet on that happening. So someone's going to get out of these regionals that are a 2 or 3 seed, maybe even a 4 seed. We'll have to see. But that's how the Super Regionals would shake out if every host won. So there you have it. That's your field of 64. You can throw out all the projections. It's the real thing now. So these games get going on Friday. I believe the first game, the East Coast games, will kick off at noon, and then they will roll through Monday if necessary. I know Sundays are the first championship of the regional, and then because you always have a team that goes undefeated in their first 2 games, and then they have to get beat twice to get knocked out. So the Monday games are only necessary if that undefeated team loses on Sunday. Then they have to play again on Monday. So starts on Friday, and then it has the chance to go through Monday. I'll be updating. I'll hop on here at some point, probably after regionals are over with, to give my reaction and then a prediction or a preview of the Super Regionals. Check out the website because I will be doing my best to cover the regionals throughout the weekend. So yeah, go ahead and check out the website, baseballfocus.org, not .com. I need to change that at some point. It's just odd, right? So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Hope you can survive the next, including today, Monday, 4 full days without college baseball. Hopefully you're an MLB fan too, so you can tune into some ball before the playoffs start to roll around here. Thanks for tuning in as always. See you on the next one.